Hello, my name is Phil Warwick and I'm a teacher and teacher trainer. I work with Pearson Education and I've been teaching for over 25 years. During my career I've taught in many countries. I started in Italy, I've taught in Brazil and Argentina, and now I currently work in a small private language school in Brno, and I go over to the UK where I'm an academic coordinator for a large summer school. In between, I'm very happy to do these training courses for Pearson, and it's great to be back in Tbilisi. We're going to talk about an area which I think is quite important for you as university lecturers, and that's English for specific purposes. Yeah, I think a lot of you, I don't know how many of you have to adjust your courses to take into account the degrees that students are studying. So I think it's quite interesting to have a look at ESP. It's actually quite a wide area. Here we have quite a few different acronyms connected to ESP. Obviously, what does ESP mean? Yeah, and of course you've got two different areas. You've got academic English and vocational English. Actually, these three here are fairly similar. English for occupational purposes, English for vocational purposes, and English for professional purposes. The only difference would be English for vocational purposes might not be a job where you need a degree. Maybe you're a plumber, maybe you're someone that needs a little bit of English, you're working in an English-speaking country, you need those things. And then the other area of ESP is English for academic purposes and English for specific academic purposes. So this is for students who are studying a specific subject. So there are two ways into these three. Either people who are working in the profession or people who are studying the subject, like your students. So we have the oldest form of English for specific purposes. Any idea what this is? English for science and technology, or technical English as well. English for legal purposes, English for medical purposes. Okay? So this is a sort of spread of what ESP is. You have to make a clear understanding whether those people need it because they're studying the subject or because they're actually working in that area. Now, when you design an ESP course, or you decide to include ESP elements into a general English course, you need to actually start right at the beginning. And I'd say that there are three things you need to consider. Obviously, you need to do a language audit of the candidates that are actually going to attend the course. What is their level of English? And you also need to do a means analysis of what facilities you have available. And you probably do this before the start of the course, obviously. So you might have a proficiency test. You might use some of the tests we talked about briefly yesterday, the Pearson tests of English, or the London Chamber of Commerce test of English. Where are the students? Do I have 10 B2 level students and 5 C1, or do I have a few B1? What are my expectations in terms of the level? You might need to include some diagnostic tests throughout the initial syllabus, so especially if it's the first time you're running a syllabus. How effective is what I'm teaching actually a benefit to the students who are studying the course? And of course, you need to accommodate different learning styles. You need to have a lot of variety in what you're teaching, and you need to consider if you need to prepare them for any specific examinations. Medicine, there's the board's examination, which is a medical exam in English, where it's not just enough to speak wonderful English, you have to have practical medical knowledge. So you might consider those. In terms of means analysis, obviously, what have you got available? Have you got computers? Have the students got computers at home? How much time do they allow you to incorporate it? You know, your expectations have to be realistic. And again, are you going to use a course book, or are you going to have to rely solely on authentic material? And of course, the students need to have some input. We talked yesterday, you mentioned to me that it's very difficult to motivate students, so they need maybe a limited amount of input. But if you're going to study legal English, is it civil law that they want, or is it international law, or is it criminal law? What sort of areas they'd like to focus on more? So some sort of input from the students is fundamental to help the motivation process. And you also need to consider other stakeholders. So those are the things you need to consider when designing a course. And also, you need to consider the needs of the individual students. So you need to provide the individual students with a clear plan. Motivation is lost if the students don't really understand why they're doing certain things. We know this. So we need to tell the students what we expect to do over a longer plan, over a semester or 2 semesters. We need to include variety, especially, and of course the clear plan generally, if you tell the students where they're at now and where you want them to get, that's enough. If you try and include different learning styles, so there's a degree of learner autonomy and the students can see what works best for them, that's important. And of course, if they're actually going to do tasks, which I think is quite useful for ESP, seeing if they can actually get to grips with the topic area, you need to give feedback. When you consider language, you need to decide why the language is needed. Is it needed because they're just going to read articles? Or is it needed because they actually have to use that in spoken forms? If you're talking about medicine, for example, bedside manner and the language of bedside manner means it's not just a passive knowledge. They need to actually be able to use it in productive skills. So, how the language is used, what the content areas are, and who will the learner use the language with if it's used productively. And of course, where the language will be used and when. So language, we can talk about sub-technical vocabulary. We have general English, then we have the sub-technical field, and then we have the technical field. Now, I don't know about you, but I trained as an English teacher. I didn't train as a doctor, I didn't train as a scientist, and of course, I think it's unfair to ask me to teach as a scientist. I can teach and improve language skills, but I have to deal with the sub-technical vocabulary. So, sub-technical vocabulary is the middle ground between general English and specific terminology. So, for example, the general, maybe we're talking about phone, the new Samsung comes out in June, that's easy to understand, I can deal with that. The business, if I'm teaching business English, we've got, again, a different field of lexis. Again, it's quite easy to understand. And at a more technical level, probably I'm not going to really deal with this. The students will tell me that. Yeah? So we're looking in this middle area. Now, you need to select material, you need to develop material. You need to think about the syllabus, the course book, if you're lucky enough to have one, authentic materials, and I think it's fundamental that you use authentic materials to motivate the students so you can do things that are up to date, that are current. How you're going to assess the student's performance in terms of progress tests, in terms of diagnostic tests, in terms of proficiency tests. Are you going to include a little bit of blended learning? Are you going to use the internet or allow the students to use the internet or research devices? Because obviously if they're studying the subject, they're going to be doing some research anyhow. Can you exploit that in the English courses? And again, how much time you have. So authentic materials. You can get them from the internet, readily. Normally, if you take an authentic material, you might decide to use some basic language teaching skills. So you might decide to cut up an article, so you're using different paragraphs and the students rejig it. Or of course you might decide to give each paragraph to a different group of students, get them to isolate one key sentence to summarizing. And maybe you might get them to have an article from a tabloid press, so it's general English, and then you might ask them to make that sub-technical, yeah, more formal. Again, you might get them to read a text and then make a presentation. So you're going from reading to speaking. Again, all of these are not new. All of these are things that we do as English teachers in general. You might give them the end of an article and ask them to write the beginning of the article, or vice versa. Give them beginning and ask them to write the end. Again, taking out gap fills, closed devices. Do you know where closed comes from, the concept? It was an American device in the 1950s, and it was designed to test the readability of students' theses. So what you'd get was a thesis, and they'd take out every seventh word. Every seventh word was taken out, and then they give it to some other people to read. If the people could still read it and still understand it with every seventh word taken out, it passed this readability test. It was well written. If they couldn't, then it failed the readability test. And of course, ever since that time, we've been using these closed devices. And of course, you can have multiple choice, similar type of stuff. So, something else I think is quite useful. I don't know if you know verb hunts. So what you do is you give them an article and you ask them to write down all the verbs in the article in the tense they appear, just the verb phrases, the verb structures. So they've got a piece of paper with the verb structures on, and you might do it just for one paragraph, and another group has another paragraph, and they swap, and they try and predict what the other words are, so they try and build up. Yeah, and it can be quite useful to concentrate on basic grammar. Now, I teach a lot of specialized courses. The course I'm teaching at the moment, I was very happy actually, because when I came back from England, my boss said to me, "Phil, come into my office a minute." Okay. He said, "I've got some good news for you this year." "What's that?" He said, "I'm going to give you more money." I'm quite happy with that. And I said, but why? Why are you giving me more money? And he said, "Well, the school has won this EU tender." And I said, "Well, that's great news. What's the tender?" And he said, "It's teaching scientific English." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "You know, I'm not great at science." He said, my favorite areas are humanities. I'm quite happy to teach history, geography, those sorts of things, but science. As soon as I could finish science in my education, I did. He said, "Don't worry." And my boss was an old chemistry teacher in secondary school in the UK. He said, "Don't worry, I'll help you if you need any help on the technical side." And I know my boss, and he's very nice, but when I actually need his help, I know it's not going to be there. My aim here, this visit, is to give an extended training program for both university lecturers and teachers of English in secondary schools. What we've been looking at is how to incorporate some of the new trends and methodologies into traditional teaching environments. Pearson have got some great books that really help secondary education, as specifically Speak Out and Language Leader for adult students and older adolescents. And we've been using these books to explore areas like e-learning, D-learning, F-learning, flexible learning, nano-learning, and conventional learning, of course, C-learning. I've been very happy with some of the teachers and university lecturers that have attended these training sessions. They're always happy to participate. I suppose one of the main areas of English for professional purposes, business English, is something we've got a lot of students now. When I worked in Brazil, I found out that actually all the students at university either studied medicine, law, finance, or business, MBAs. And so,
Same
situation as Georgia. So of course business English becomes quite popular, and it's quite interesting because business English is an area that we think, oh, this is general English, and we can teach this. But it's a little bit more advanced than you might imagine. So very briefly, what's the differences? Some of the basic differences between business English and general English. Can you discuss with your partner? What are some of the fundamental differences between general English and business English? There's more of a lexical approach. Yeah, we're going to spend longer with chunks of language. It's going to be more functional. So there's less emphasis on the 4 skills, and when I talk about the 4 skills, reading, writing, listening, speaking, yeah, more emphasis on business skills, persuading, negotiating, those types of things, functional language, which is where we get the lexical approach from. Different domains create different topics. Now, when you have a look at business, of course, there are plenty of business books out there. Pearson produces 2 big ones. Market Leader is one you're all aware of. I decided to show you Intelligent Business because you might not know it as well. Intelligent Business actually has this extra component. So most course book series have a course book, they have a workbook, and they have a teacher's book. The skills book, what makes this quite useful is the skills book works at functional, practical, productive skills, and it's a 30-hour book. So if you've got students who have to take and show their general English progress, and you're doing a lot of preparation in general English terms, but you want to incorporate a little bit of ESP, something like this is quite nice. It's full colour, there's a CD-ROM with lots of video and audio in there, and it's only 30 hours. So you can incorporate it in a year's teaching. 30 hours. 15 units, each unit is 2 hours long. And it's designed for more productive skills, for practicing. We wanted to do a little bit of grammar. It's interesting, but obviously, for the airline industry, English is the language that's used. And there's one particular tense that is used automatically at in the airline industry that's not perhaps introduced so quickly in general English terms. So let's do a tiny little bit of grammar. Let me ask you, how many tenses does the English language have? Talk to your partner. How many tenses does the English language have? Well, talk to your partner, see if your partner agrees. So it depends who you ask. Obviously, in course books, there are frequent verb structures that are given labels and that we tend to use with students. And I suppose if you think about those terms of things, you might have the present, and you can say you've got the present simple, the present continuous or progressive, depends how old your grammar is, and you've got the present perfect simple, and of course the present perfect progressive or continuous. And then you've got the same for the past, and you've got the same for the future. Those are labels. That's 12. Yeah? That's 12. Then you've got some people who say, well, actually, you've got active and passive. And so the present simple passive is different from the present simple active, and that could be different. You've got some people who refer to tense as time, and they say, well, there's 3, past, present, and future. Yeah? In fact, I think the standard way of looking at it, the English tense system, and the way that I suppose is the simplest, is something like this. So you could divide English into tense aspect, and mood. Tense, aspect, and mood. Yeah? And I think in terms of morphology, most grammarians prefer this pattern. When we talk about tense, we'll say that you've got a choice between the present and the past. Yeah? And when you talk about aspect, you can say it's either going to be the progressive, or continuous, or the perfect. Let's leave mood for a second. So, if we say, for example, he lives in France, this sentence is marked for present tense. There's no aspect. And okay, we haven't heard intonation or anything else, but let's assume there's no mood. So this is a very basic sentence. Whereas he's living in France automatically is a more complex sentence, because this sentence is also marked for aspect. So we have present tense plus aspect. Yeah? And the aspect gives us some extra information. Yeah? Maybe it's temporary. Yeah? Maybe it's temporary. There are finite uses of the progressive aspect or the continuous aspect. Let's assume in this case, because we only have that, maybe if we have a context we can say it's this. Or we can have something like this. Which again is more complex than the previous one, because it's marked for two aspects. It's marked for the continuous and for the perfect. So this gives us fundamentally more information than this sentence. And in order to decode it, we have to work out what reason is the perfect aspect being used, what does it give us there. And of course mood, there are many ways of including mood in a sentence, but one of them is obviously through modals. Yeah? So we can say he must have been living in France, and automatically we've got present tense, continuous aspect, perfect aspect, and it's marked for mood. And so it's fundamentally far more complex than that, and there's more information that the students need to understand. So I think getting the students to understand, if there is a difference, they have to work out why the difference is there and what the difference is quite useful. The problem that we have is that we know that there isn't really a future tense in English. But we also know, we talked yesterday about acquisition and we talked about learning. Now, one of the things that's easily acquired or early acquired is a concept of futurity, being able to express the future. So we need to introduce that concept because many languages do have a set future form. So we need to say, well, here's what we use in English. But it's always a bit tricky. If you look at any elementary course book, we introduce the idea of will, and then very soon afterwards we introduce the idea of going to. Yeah? So will or going to and will. And we have students, because when you talk about errors, you talk about global errors and non-global errors. Global errors impede the meaning of the sentence. I can't understand. If the student says, I will go yesterday, that's a global error. Yeah? Now, a student can use going to and will and keep on making mistakes, and it's never going to be a global error. So they can get away with not really understanding the difference between will and going to, up to a really high level of English. Okay, so if we look at this, we can say that if we describe what the structures are, this is a pure modal. Yeah, it's a pure modal verb. And this is a marginal modal structure. Yeah? So both can bring mood into a sentence, but will always brings the speaker's mood into the sentence. So, although the writer's mood into the sentence. So, going to doesn't necessarily bring the writer's mood or the speaker's mood so much. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. If we have a look at some of the typical grammar books, I'll give you 3 typical grammar explanations that students are exposed to. Not necessarily good ones. Going to is used for 2 things. It's used for decisions and predictions. Yeah? Decisions and predictions. Will is used for more than 2 things, but 2 of the things it's used for are decisions and predictions. Yeah? Going to is, well, will is used for spontaneous decisions. Going to is used for planned intentions. For a start, look at me. I'm using meta language that the students might not understand anyhow. And actually, is it really true? Because can I not say, you know, I think I'm going to tell him now. You know, I think I'm going to tell him now. You know, I think I'm going to tell him now what I think of it. That's grammatically correct. That's a correct concept. Could be the immediate future. Yeah? And if I say, I will do it next year sometime. I'll do it next year sometime. It's not necessarily the immediate future. Yeah? So a lot of the rules that we tell our students are completely redundant anyhow. We need to concentrate on more important, fundamental differences. So, for example, if we know that will adds mood to a sentence, then we know that will is not going to be limited to the future. If we take these 2 utterances, on Fridays, I go for a drink with my boss after work. On Fridays, I go for a drink with my boss after work.
It's regular.
Tense. Well, if we use our model, we can say it's just present tense. Yeah, it's a simple sentence, present tense. Is there any aspect there?
No.
No. Is there any mood there?
No.
No. Okay? So there's no aspect, there's no mood, it's a simple sentence. On Fridays, I'll go for a drink with my boss after work. What tense is that?
Future.
Ah, but I told you a model here where I didn't have any future. No, I said basically you've got past and present, you've got aspect, and you've got mood. Have a look at this sentence. What tense is this? You've got a choice of 2, present or past?
Present.
It's present. Okay, it's present. Now, on Fridays is a general habitual action. It's present. It's decision. So I know that this sentence is not marked for aspect, but I can see this as a modal, and I can say this utterance is marked for mood. So this utterance is more complex than on Fridays I go for a drink with my boss after work. It's more restricted. So what does this mood tell me? Well, it's on Fridays. It's every Friday.
I want something like that.
Exactly. It adds my moods. During our initial session on methodology, we've covered lots of different areas, and we've also looked at some of the technological advances. I think Pearson is a language leader in this area with things like My English Lab, which really helps students with flexible learning and help learner autonomy and enable the teacher to get a good, clear example of where the students are. Some of the other things we've been doing, we've been looking at specialised courses. Increasingly now in private language schools, specialisation seems to be a unique selling point. So you don't have students who want just English, but they want English for medical purposes or English for legal purposes, or in the case of some of the courses I teach in the Czech Republic, English for science and technology. Now, luckily Pearson have got quite a few new titles that are really helpful for these specialised courses.
Cultural awareness.
Cultural awareness, well, being aware of the different cultures. For example, I can't think of another culture which is so hospitable than the Georgians. I don't have much of a breakfast at the hotel because I know I'm going to eat quite a lot of food during the day. Again, how formal you need to be, how distant you need to be from various things. Can you use a joke?
Very, very, very.
Very, very. Shall I tell you a joke?
Please.
Tell you a joke now. I don't know many jokes about business English. But I will tell you the joke about business English that I know. And you can tell me if it's appropriate for the Georgian audience or not.
And is it appropriate for British audience?
It's appropriate for the British audience or the English audience because we make lots of fun about stereotypes. It would be less appropriate for the Scottish audience because, or the Welsh audience, and definitely the Irish. Okay, so here it is. Here's my terrible one business English joke. There's a good job, a good position for a CEO for a new company, and the interviews, there have been different rounds of interviews, and the interviews have been held in London, yeah, where the HQ is of this international company. Now, the company has lots of different subsidiary bases, and predominantly its markets are in Italy, in Spain, and in Germany. And so the three candidates that have reached the final selection, one happens to be Spanish, one happens to be Italian, one happens to be German. And they've gone through to this final stage and they said, okay, go to your hotel, next week we're going to give you the results, but before we do, we haven't given you any language tests. So what we'd like you to do is just come in and we'd like you to just speak a little bit of English so we can see how good it is. And what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to use the word pink, yellow and green. And so the three candidates go like, oh God, English tests, pink, yellow and green. How am I going to use the words pink, yellow and green and not sound stupid? The German comes in and says, well, you know, I thought a lot about this talk, and I was walking through the park, and I see the grass is green, and the sun, oh, it's bright, and the flowers, I think daffodils, because it's been on Google Translate, I think daffodils very yellow today. And I am wearing pink tie because yeah, and the guy says, thank you very much. Now the Italian, he was drinking Chianti all night. He says, I'll worry about it in the morning. And he comes in, he speaks very quickly. Well, it's a very good time for me to be here talking to you all today because, you know, I think the sun is shining, it's yellow in the sky, and, you know, I think very much about green environmental issues, and I think they're very important for us in this company. And of course, I think we need to have an inclusive employment issue with pink dollar is very important for them. Thank you very much. Spanish guy, unfortunately, he knows his English is less adaptable than the other two candidates. This is why I think I'm a good candidate, but my English isn't so good. And he has no idea what to do or what to say. He doesn't sleep at all. He comes in, bags under his eyes. I says, you know, I don't know. All night I'm thinking, I don't know what. Then the phone, it goes green, green, green. I pick up the phone, I say, hello. I one bad joke about this. And I'd say it's probably appropriate for I wouldn't say it in other environments. Again, we need to consider cultural awareness. We need to get our students to consider cultural awareness. Even though we haven't got sound, give me one attitude where the culture is different between Britain and China. For food. For food. Well, there's obviously different types of food. Strangely enough, in the language school in the UK I used to work at, we always used to get Chinese teachers over in the summer and give them courses, teaching courses. And we found that in order to make the Chinese teachers really happy, not so much about the course content, but if we allowed them to finish their classes 5 minutes before every other class, so they were first in the queue for the food, they would be incredibly happy. Because food is very, and of course we'd have to give them rice, they're less changeable and adaptable than say the English people are. But in China, when someone invites you for a meal, you never eat it all. It's rude to... Yes, they do. You never eat it all. I spent 2.5 years living in Shanghai, and I have to say, I was the only non-Chinese manager, and I had a lot of Chinese employees. I was working in the teacher training department. And what I noticed straight away was every weekend for the first couple of months, my employees would come visit me. Not because they liked me, but because they had to show face and they had to show respect and they had to bring me presents. And it was a bit of a pain because my 2 days off, I didn't want to see the staff, but they come. And of course, the other thing I noticed was strategic thinking. I was in charge of 5 different schools, and I'd go around to one school, and I'd have a manager, a Chinese manager in the school, and I'd say to the Chinese manager, "Everything okay with the teaching here?" And the Chinese, "Oh yeah, everything's okay." Because in China, it's very rude to point out problems. Your boss is like a father figure. It's up to your boss to discover that there are problems. So you can't ask direct questions like you would in England. You have to discover them. And with food, when they invite you out, you always leave a little bit just to assure the person that you've had enough to eat. There was more than enough. In England, if you leave a little bit on your plate, it means you don't like it. I think Georgia is the same. It's the same. It's the same. So as Georgians, you need to be quite. So you won't be able to hear this, but I think you'll be able to work out what the culture is. I think that's a good example of how cultural awareness is quite important for the students to realise. Georgians are very friendly people. They seem to be very active in the classrooms, but they don't seem to have had an awful lot of outside help in terms of developing their teaching careers. I've been surprised by some of the environments in which I've given seminars. Some of them seem to be equipped with the latest smart boards and projectors. Others still have the old-fashioned blackboard with pieces of chalk. I think the range of language for the participants has also been quite interesting. Some of the people who have attended my courses have got a C2 level of English. They're very fluent. A lot of them have American accents. A lot of them talk about the standard of their students as being quite high. Meanwhile, I've seen some of the older teachers who've come along, who've been teaching far longer than I have, who are still passionate about teaching and still willing to learn more, which is always good to see. You framed that under one sort of situation. So each unit in legal English takes one situation and expands on the situation. Initially, there's some basic legal notes. There are also some basic precedents that you can refer to. So this information, you'd expect the students, if they were pre-experienced, if they weren't lawyers, if they were still learning law, you might feel that you have to perhaps reinforce the legal backgrounds. You've actually got this here on the sheet somewhere. Yeah? Then you have lots of tasks. So obviously the students would take the role of lawyers because they're studying law, and they would have some instructions, as lawyers do. So here's the instructions, and it's basically the whole place is removing a director from the board. So you have the information of this Kadir Saleh, and you have the idea that you want to remove him from the board. Your client says, let's get rid of him, he's no good, he's costing the company money. You would then read an example of a legal document, a standard document, which is the service agreement. So the students would get exposure to the format of standard legal documents. And here we've got a standard service agreement. They'd use that in the context of this one case study. You might ask them to consider, again, various clauses in the contract to be able to pick up information ready for the simulation that the students are going to do when they role play. Yeah? Obviously, there's going to be some degree of lexis. Can you do a few of these? I don't expect you to do too many. They're on the sheet. Any idea what the second one is?
Terms and conditions.
Terms and conditions. So they're very standard lexis, and this, again, it's the sheets on there. Standard lexis, the type of language you would expect to see in a service agreement. Yeah? Because you're exposing the students to one type of legal document. We're talking about employment law here in this particular unit. Service agreements are quite important for employment law. You're going to do some little bit of vocab exercises so the students are clear about that type of lexis. Again, you're talking about a letter. Yeah, we're talking about productive skill. You're going to practice building on that productive skill. You're going to use prompts. So you've got a prompt letter, there's a gap fill, they're going to look at, again, members of a company. We know members of a company are shareholders. So again, you're going to do a little bit of lexis. They're going to use that vocabulary to complete a pro forma letter. Then you've got a little bit of grammar. And of course, you've got conditionals. And again, you've got some sort of future forms, you've got passive, you've got those sorts of things. And again, you're building the student's knowledge on standard phrases. One of the things that you have with law, you have legalese. Legalese is basic structures, fossilized terms, terminology that you wouldn't see outside of law particularly. At this level, you're talking about basic structures, but in the types of language that's shown in a service agreement, you'll see some of this fossilized terminology as well. You have role plays. We talked yesterday about divergent, convergent role plays and getting the students to actually take the role. So the important thing is you've got a skill, negotiation. Lawyers are involved in lots of negotiation, corporate law, employment law, whatever. And of course, you've got a framework. Just like an intelligent business, we saw, and you've got part of this framework, I think, on the photocopy here, the negotiation plan. Yeah, so you've got a framework to prepare the students for the task. You get the students to write some notes for the task, the client's goals, what are you going to do, etc., etc. And then you have the role play. Yeah, so the negotiation between two lawyers. And of course, the two lawyers have different clients' instructions and different information. So you have one type of information for one lawyer, one type of information for another lawyer. And again, one of the useful things, when you've got lots of text, if you've got students who are a little bit weaker, you can certainly add in some of your basic English things. So here I might find something like addition. Here I've got some words and I might say, okay, where could you insert these words into these notes? So I'm using my basic English knowledge. The board is anxious, the board is extremely anxious. Yeah? So just to show that they understand the text. So at any stage with the course book material, I can use my basic teaching skills to adapt, extend. Yeah, if I feel that they're not really understanding the context, I might do some basic teaching skills to show that the students they've got that comprehension. And then afterwards, with any task base, and I'm sure you know the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 approach to tasks, do you? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? So one of the concepts of any task-based piece of speaking, you get the students to speak, you give them good feedback, and you get them to repeat the task with a different partner, or use the same language in a similar task. Surprise, surprise, they always say more fluently, in less time, yeah, than before. And they can see the benefits and improvements of this. So far too often as teachers, we get the students to do a task, maybe the task is multi-layered, maybe it takes a long time to do, and then when the task is finished, so's the lesson. Far better to break the task down into smaller chunks, get the students to repeat the same type of task again, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, get them to do it in 5 minutes. Give them good feedback, get them to do it in 4 with different partners. Then get them to do it in 3, then get them to do it in 2. So you always give them less time, and you get to see if they can reach the same point, and they're using the same modified structure. So it's very useful for task-based learning. So, again, at the back of the book, of the unit, with this legal thing, you need to have some basic law knowledge in order to understand the basic concepts. And you also need to look at what type of grammar is being introduced. So something like that legal English, you've got each unit is a situation. Each unit exposes the students to a different part of law, and you've got the legal notes at the back, and it's all based around exposing them to type of legal documents, exposing them to type of lexis connected to that field, and because it's lexically heavy, there's plenty of opportunity to get you involved in doing other things.
Cases,
Every unit is a different case.
No. Oh, really?
Every unit is a different case. So it's plenty of opportunity to focus on tasks.
So it's based on some kind of case, right?
Each unit is based on some type of case. So Unit 4, which is dealing with service agreements, is based on one case and expands that case into a role play. All right. All in all, this has been a really rewarding experience, and I've been very happy to come to Tbilisi, and I'm always happy to eat Georgian food and experience Georgian hospitality. So I hope they invite me again.